DeFi U content. So we're going to have the actual, DeFi Hive content ready to rock and roll on Monday, I think. So that's going to be pretty darn cool, man. And I've got this. Yeah, so you see, so you're hopped into the course hub right now. So let me see. Is this me? You're sharing my screen there?
No, I'm sharing my screen, but I can definitely share yours.
Yeah, so I was thinking, today what we could do is we could go through a couple of lessons from the Beginner DeFi Concepts course. And I thought that lesson 7 and lesson 8 might be interesting for us today: decentralized exchanges and DeFi lending and borrowing. So I thought that, it's always important to learn about decentralized exchanges, right? Like, so when you're taking a look at something like Ostium Labs, if you want to trade silver, like this is copper. But if you hop on in here to commodities, Mike was just talking about copper being up above $100. You can trade, or I'm sorry, silver being up above $100.
Copper's over $100.
Copper over 100.
I'm gonna start ripping the wires out of my house.
Oh my goodness, man! But if you want to trade these RWAs, you need to learn how to use a DEX, a decentralized exchange. So why don't we go ahead and run through DEXs, the engine of DeFi.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving deep into the engine that powers a whole new kind of finance: decentralized exchanges. We're going to break down the amazing and, surprisingly simple tech that makes it all possible: the automated market maker, or AMM. So to really get what makes AMMs so revolutionary, let's just start with a kind of wild question. For literally centuries, trading has needed one key thing: another person to take the other side of your deal.
So, Mike, what do we know about order books? Because, if you hop into a perps DEX like Hyperliquid, Hyperliquid is a great example of a decentralized exchange that uses a central limit order book. So you see where it says order book right here?
Yep.
This is your book. And so what the DEX is doing here, this architecture, because there are different types of decentralized exchanges. They are not all the same. So Hyperliquid is a central limit order book DEX. And all that means is that if I step in and, maybe I want to trade Bitcoin, right? So I hop on in here, maybe I want to trade some BTC. If I want to buy BTC here, then my buy order will be put into the order book. And when the price here gets very, very close to my limit order, then it will be matched with someone who wants to take the opposite side. So if I want to buy, there's got to be someone on the opposite side to sell it to me. So that's what a central limit order book is. It matches buyers and sellers. There are other types of DEXs though, and I'm sure that this video content here will get into that. But this is an example of what a central limit order book. This is what an order book looks like. And so if you ever hear, Mike, have you ever heard someone, on YouTube or on X talking about, book depth? Or I was looking at the book, and that's what they're referring to. They're referring to this. And you can actually read this and you can say, hey, look at all of this selling pressure. It looks like there might be more liquidity at the top of the book, people stepping in to sell this than to buy it. But this is just one exchange, though. There are many, many, many exchanges. So let's hop back into the video content.
But what if you didn't need that other person at all? What if you could just trade with the market itself? On one side, you have the traditional world, this whole complicated dance of matching up buyers and sellers. It's all about people, intentions, and orders. But on the other side, you've got this new model. It just scraps all that complexity and replaces it with a pure, elegant mathematical formula. And that right there, that's the absolute core idea behind decentralized finance, or DeFi. You're not haggling with a person or trusting a big company. Nope. You are interacting directly with a pool of assets that's run by a piece of code. And the engine making it all happen, that's the automated market maker.
So this is a really interesting concept. If I just pause for a second and hop on over to like a Uniswap, right? If I'm over here on Uniswap if I want to, maybe I want to swap some USDC, maybe I've got some USDC here, maybe I want to swap 100 USDC for ETH. Well, if I'm over here on Uniswap and I'm swapping USDC for ETH, I'm not using an order book. I'm actually trading against a pool. And so that pool uses an automated market maker. That's the math to give me a quote and swap asset A for asset B. So Uniswap is an example of a decentralized exchange that uses an AMM and liquidity pools to facilitate trades. So this is really like the core of
Or
decentralized.
swaps.
Yeah, swaps. Yeah, you could think of them as swaps. You could think of them as trades. But yeah, if you swap USDC for ETH, that's a trade. That's a trade.
Oh yeah, it's just I think it's easier for people that are just starting to be able to differentiate, kind of what we're talking about by because whenever they go to a swap and they do a swap, it's just in their head they're thinking this is a swap. If you get into the mechanics of it and what's happening behind the scenes, it 100% is a trade. But I just for the
Oh yeah.
sake of just keeping it clear for people.
Oh, for sure, man. And so the jargon, the
Yeah.
language,
Yes.
it really is like learning a foreign language when you
Yeah.
start to get into this stuff.
Yeah.
So, it's just important for everyone to know that when you're swapping on a decentralized exchange, you are using a liquidity pool and you're actually depositing. If I wanted to swap USDC for ETH, I would actually be depositing my USDC into the pool and then, according to the AMM, withdrawing ETH from the pool.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how the swaps actually are executed on chain. So
Yeah.
pretty cool, man. Pretty cool stuff. Let's go ahead. Let's see if we can run back through.
But, to really appreciate how big a deal this is, we've got to look at the old way of doing things, the Central Limit Order Book, or CLOB. This is the bedrock of pretty much every traditional stock market and big crypto exchange out there. Think of it like a giant digital auction house, working nonstop to pair up buy orders and sell orders. AMMs, just throw that entire concept out the window. Seriously, they completely get rid of the order book. There are no lists of buy and sell orders waiting around. Instead, the price is figured out on the fly by an algorithm for every single trade. And at the heart of the first and most popular AMMs is this little formula, the constant product formula. I know, it looks almost laughably simple, right? X times Y equals K. But trust me, this simple equation is the mathematical bedrock that makes this whole system work. So let's pull this apart. X is just the amount of one token in the trading pool, and Y is the amount of the other token. But the real star of the show here is K, the constant. The rule is simple. The total value, the product of X and Y, has to always equal K. So when a trade changes X, Y has to change to keep things balanced. And that, right there, is what sets the price. Okay, so this all leads to a pretty logical question, right? If there's no order book and no person on the other end of your trade, where are the assets actually coming from? You're trading with something called liquidity pool. Think of it like a big shared pot of funds. It's really just a smart contract that holds a bunch of two different tokens. If you want to buy one, you put the other into the pot. If you want to sell, you do the reverse.
So this is basically the core of most DeFi right here, these liquidity pools, right?
Yeah.
And so what we were taking a look at in the video content earlier, where it was showing us what a central limit order book is like, that's something like Hyperliquid, where you're trading against other traders. But if you're going to swap asset A for asset B using a liquidity pool, that would be something more like over here on Uniswap, using that automated market maker. And that automated market maker, it operates based on that X times Y equals K formula. Now that's for full range liquidity pools.
Yeah.
But once you start getting into concentrated liquidity, it gets quite a bit more complicated.
Yes, it does.
So look, already in just not even 5 minutes, in just like 3 minutes, we've touched on central limit order books, we've touched on liquidity pools, decentralized exchanges, automated market makers, the formula that makes it all run. So there's a lot to know here, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of different pieces of jargon. And so if I was just starting to learn this stuff for the first time, Mike, what I would do is I would take, they call this a pen, right? I would take a pen and paper and I would write this stuff down, man. Write that down and take notes. I think that's probably a good idea.
So, who fills up this pot? Well, that's where liquidity providers, or LPs, come in. And here's the cool part. Basically, anyone can be an LP. You can take your own tokens, deposit them into a pool, and provide the liquidity that makes all these trades possible. And why would you do that? Well, for every single trade that uses your pool, you earn a little slice of the fee. All right, enough theory. Let's make this real. Imagine we've got a pool here with 100 ETH and 200,000 USDC. We multiply those two together, and bam, we get our constant, K, which is 20 million. That number now has to stay the same. So how do we get the price from this? It's super simple. It's just the ratio between the two assets. You take the 200,000 USDC divided by the 100 ETH, and there you have it. The current market price is 2,000 USDC for 1 ETH. Simple enough? Okay, now watch closely because this is where the magic happens. A trader shows up and wants to buy 1 ETH. That means the amount of ETH in our pool is going to drop from 100 down to 99. Now remember our golden rule. X times Y must stay at 20 million. So for that to be true, the amount of USDC in the pool has to go up. The smart contract does the math instantly and tells the trader exactly how much USDC they need to add to keep the equation balanced. So what does that do to the price? And there it is. The new price of ETH is now 2040.6 USDC. You just saw the formula work in real time. Because the trade took some ETH out of the pool, making it more scarce, the algorithm automatically made it more expensive, all to keep that K value locked at 20 million. That change in price, the jump from 2,000.
So why don't we just review that for a second? So that entire process of executing a swap. So number one, who are you trading or who are you swapping against? So if you're over here on Uniswap, you're actually swapping asset A for asset B against a pool of both assets.
Yeah.
So all you do is if you want to swap your USDC for ETH, you're going to deposit that USDC into the pool, and then the pool is going to send you the right amount of ETH. And so that's where that formula comes in, where it's X times Y equals K.
Well, and to simplify this a little bit, for those of you out there, if a really easy way to think about this is there always has to be an equal dollar amount value of each of these assets. Like when it's USDC and ETH, there's going to be an equal dollar value. Obviously, there's not going to be the same number of tokens. It's not going. You're not going to have $200,000, or 200,000 USDC and 200,000 ETH tokens. You're going to have, if there's $200,000 total in that liquidity pool, you're going to have $100,000 worth of ETH and $100,000 worth of USDC in this full range pool, and it's going to consistently do what David's talking about, to where it's either going to buy or sell one of those assets to keep that balanced.
Exactly right. And so where do the assets come from in the first place, right? Like
me and you.
Exactly. We are the regular retail users. We are liquidity providers. So when we provide,
can liquidity come from like institutional vaults and things like that?
It definitely can.
Okay.
It definitely can. If I'm over here on Uniswap, though, I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority of liquidity here on Uniswap is, normal, everyday guys and gals providing liquidity and earning trading fees as a result. So what happens when you provide liquidity? What does that actually mean, right? Well, providing liquidity simply means you have one, or in this case, you would need both tokens in equal amounts. You provide them as liquidity to the pool. and then you receive almost like a receipt. You receive they're referred to as LP tokens.
Mhm.
So when you provide liquidity to a full range pool, you receive these LP tokens almost like a receipt. And so when you provide liquidity, why would you do that? What is your incentive to provide liquidity to a pool?
Yield.
Well, exactly right. Yield. And so, but where does that yield come
Well,
from?
it's like that video I showed. It's just like, because I'm selfless. It's like,
No, man. So it's actually more. It's kind of more selfish because
oh yeah,
yeah, because when you provide liquidity, like you're doing that because your incentive is to earn yield. So where does that yield come from?
yeah.
You know, it comes from the trades or the swaps.
Mhm.
So when I go into Uniswap and I want to swap that USDC for ETH,
You pay a little fee.
I pay a little fee. And who earns that fee? The liquidity providers earn that fee. So that's why there's an incentive to provide liquidity in the first place. If I know that, hey, if I've got some USDC and I've got some ETH and I want to earn some yield on that, well, I know that if I provide that liquidity to a pool, a full range pool, I might be able to earn like 10% in yield paid in USDC and ETH. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty great yield, especially for a full range pool.
Yeah.
So yeah, man. But if I'm, going to swap asset A for asset B, I'm
Mhm.
definitely going to pay a small fee, usually, 0.3%, sometimes less than that, sometimes a little bit more than that if I'm swapping a meme coin, let's say. But I also have other expenses and
Oh man.
slippage, man. Yeah. Let's see what it says about slippage.
1000 to over 2040, that's what we call price impact. You'll also hear it called slippage. It's literally the effect your own trade has on the market price, and it's pretty intuitive. The bigger your trade is compared to the size of the pool, the more you're going to move the price. Now, of course, being a liquidity provider
I'm sorry,
isn't.
Nim, can we listen to that one more time?
Absolutely. Let me back this up here. Let's take a look at that content about slippage.
I want to make sure people
Be,
get this because it's important.
it really is.
That change in price, the jump from 2000 to over 2040, that's what we call price impact. You'll also hear it called slippage. It's literally the effect your own trade has on the market price, and it's pretty intuitive. The bigger your trade is compared to the size of the pool, the more you're going to move the price.
So if we just go back through that math just real quick right here.
Mhm.
So remember, if you initiate a trade, then let's say you want to buy one ETH from the pool, you're going to have to deposit the correct amount of USDC into that pool.
Mhm.
And then the pool, the math, that automated market maker, is going to swap your USDC for the correct amount of ETH. And now the result is that the price in the pool for ETH is going to go up. And so that price going up, that is referred to as your price impact. So what you're essentially doing is you're pushing the price up against yourself. Now,
Mhm.
the exact opposite could happen if you were to sell, meaning if you were to deposit ETH and receive USDC. You could, depending on the size of your swap and the amount of liquidity in the pool, you could push the price down against yourself.
Well, that's why it's so important that when you're doing swaps that you're reading those pop-ups, because there's been people that have done swaps and they've done like millions of dollars,
Yeah.
worth of swaps. And by the time it's all said and done, they're missing a lot of money. And that was due to
Oh,
slippage and not reading before you approve.
and sometimes, Mike, that slippage can be catastrophic. Um, I remember reading, it must have been in 2023 at some point, that a trader, he went to, one of these decentralized exchanges and he wanted to swap 100,000, I think it was $100,000 of ETH. He wanted to swap it for USDC.
Mhm.
And if you've ever noticed, like if you're using Rabby or MetaMask or Phantom or whatever your favorite wallet is, when you go to swap asset A for asset B, it's going to show you your slippage. Usually the DEX that you're working on
Yeah.
will show you slippage too, but you'll almost always see that slippage in your wallet.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, man, unfortunately, this trader, he didn't check the slippage. Sometimes you can move too quickly and not slow down and just look at everything and make sure that everything looks good. And so he swapped $100,000 of ETH for $1
Yeah.
for one USDC. The price impact, the slippage, was 99.99%.
And what causes that? Is that like a low liquidity issue?
It could be liquidity. Sometimes it's just an error, and if you don't catch it, you can lose literally everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
In a lot of wallets and protocols, they do have settings. Like I know in like a VSwap and things like, or VFAT, there's a setting to where you can say that I only allow, or I only want this to go through if it's 0.1% or 1% or whatever you set. So there are those, but you still want to review all of the details of those pop-ups, because you never know. It's worth that couple of seconds doing those checks, so that you don't end up losing, $900 or $99,999.99 or whatever.
Yeah, I know, dude. It's horrible. It's so horrible. But
Yeah.
you just got to make sure to slow down and just look and read everything, because, hey, at the end of the day, this is your money that we're talking about here. Like if you went to the bank and you wanted to break a $20 bill,
You're going to count it before you leave.
right? And you see the teller wants to give you $1 for your $20 bill. You probably say, hey, hold on a second.
I didn't know there's slippage at the bank.
Right? Same thing going on here, man. You just got to make sure to slow down and count your money before you actually execute that swap.
Absolutely.
The equation balanced. So what does that do to the price? And there it is. The new price of ETH is now 2040.6 USDC. You just saw the formula work in real time. Because the trade took some ETH out of the pool, making it more scarce, the algorithm automatically made it more expensive, all to keep that K value locked at 20 million.
And so that's the price impact. So price impact is really based on the amount of liquidity in the pool and the size of your swap compared to that amount of liquidity. For example, if there's $1 million in liquidity in the pool and you go in and you want to swap $5, well, you're not going to move the price against yourself. But if there's $1 million of liquidity in the pool and you want to go in and you want to swap $500,000, you're going to move the price against yourself a lot. So just keep that in mind.
You might want to spread that liquidity out across a couple different places.
Exactly. Or maybe just don't execute that swap all at once. Break it up into smaller pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Change in price, the jump from 2000 to over 2040, that's what we call price impact. You'll also hear it called slippage. It's literally the effect your own trade has on the market price, and it's pretty intuitive. The bigger your trade is compared to the size of the pool, the more you're going to move the price. Now, of course, being a liquidity provider isn't all just sitting back and collecting fees. There are real risks, and the most unique one is something called impermanent loss. To put it simply, if the prices of the two tokens you deposited change a lot out on the wider market, the AMM's constant rebalancing can mean you actually end up with less value than if you just held onto the tokens in your own wallet. It's a tricky concept, but a super important one for any LP.
Okay, so we're starting to get into some more advanced stuff here, but let's just see if we can talk through this real quick.
It's important. It's important because impermanent loss is if you're going to invest in liquidity pools at all, concentrated or otherwise, you need to understand what impermanent loss is.
You really, really do. And if we're talking here about full range liquidity provision, it's a little bit easier to understand than concentrated liquidity provision. So if I, take two assets, two tokens, and I provide them as liquidity to a pool, and then let's say that I provide that in an ETH USDC pool. So I put some ETH in there, I put some USDC in there, I put them in there in equal amounts. And then what happens? The price of ETH moves up and down. Well, if the price of ETH moves up and down in the pool, if I provided that liquidity with ETH at $3,000 and the price goes from 3,000 to 3,100, well, that is called divergence. So it doesn't matter if the price diverges from your entry. Remember, your entry was $3,000. If the price diverges from that up to 3,100 or down to 2,900, it doesn't matter if it went up or down. All that matters is that it did diverge from your entry. And so impermanent loss is simply the difference between the amount in US dollars that you would have if you did nothing, if you just held the two tokens that you deposited, versus the amount in US dollars that you have based on the price divergence. So if ETH goes from your entry 3,000 up to 3,100, what is the difference between your assets at 3,100 and if you had just held them outside of the pool and done nothing? So what you're really doing is you're comparing how much you would have if you did nothing versus how much you do have as a result of providing liquidity. So sometimes that impermanent loss number can become really, really big, but there's a reason why it's called impermanent. Because what happens if price goes up to 3,100 and then comes right back down to where you provided that liquidity in the first place at 3,000? Well, it's impermanent because you would have the divergence at 3,100, but back down to 3,000, no more divergence, right? And so if you're the LP, if you're providing liquidity and you know that you have this impermanent loss risk, why would you provide liquidity in the first place? If you know that you've got this big risk of impermanent loss and you could potentially make more by doing nothing, why would you provide liquidity at all? Well, because of the fees, those trading fees that you earn whenever someone goes in and makes a swap using your assets that you provided to the pool, you earn a little fee. And so those fees, when those fees are more than your impermanent loss, then you're profitable in the pool, and you're profitable by more than if you had just held the assets and done nothing. So look, it's a complex topic. Impermanent loss, yeah.
Well, and there's tools. I mean, you don't have to do all this math and figuring on your own. There's really good tools like Jake's Metrics Finance. You
Right.
can use that free version, and actually, you know what? I'll show you real quick because this
Sure.
is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, it definitely is.
So let me do this. So this is Metrics Finance, and again, I'm not saying go straight out and get the paid version. There's a free version. It will do all of what we're talking about, but you can go to track, and I actually have some of my positions in here, and I'll show you. It will give you and do all the calculations for you, so that you'll know, versus HODL. So you have your versus HODL here. So I'm positive $4.31 on this pool, versus if I just held the assets. But again, all of this, your P&L, your versus HODL, this is all telling you, you're basically if you are being profitable or not. For one, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second, but it's showing you if you are accruing impermanent loss, and the key is that it's impermanent until you exit the position. So once you exit the position, you're locking in that loss. Is that correct?
Yes. So if you provide liquidity to a pool and then price diverges from your entry, here, let me go ahead and bring this back on up. So if you provide liquidity to a pool and price diverges either up or down from your entry price, so that would just be the price at which you provided your liquidity in the first place. If we're using ETH as an example, then maybe we could use $3,000 as the price that you enter the pool at. So if price diverges from your entry price, either up or down, the more it moves, either up or down, the bigger your impermanent loss becomes. Now, the way that you can beat impermanent loss is simply by staying in the pool, earning yield without removing your tokens. You see, if you provide liquidity and then there's a big move up or down, you're going to have a lot of impermanent loss depending on the pool that you're in and the tokens that you provided as liquidity. If you're paired with a stable coin, if you're in ETH paired with USDC, people like to call those impermanent loss factories because you're going to generate a ton of impermanent loss up or down.
Well, it's a double-edged sword because a boring sideways market, you're going to get less impermanent loss, and if you're in a ranged pool, you're going to stay in range more, and so you're going to earn more fees. But with more volatility and price movement, usually means there's more activity in the market and people doing swaps and things like that. So you're earning more fees, but you're going out of range. There's other that impermanent loss factor. So it's this delicate dance that you're doing, of figuring out kind of what market you're in. Is it the market pumping? Is it dumping? Is it going sideways? And you need to understand these nuances that David's going over, because it's going to frame your decision making on the types of pools that you get into, maybe the ranges that you set, all these different things, because you're not going to do a really tight range if it's a really volatile market. Because if you do a really tight range, you're probably going to be constantly rebalancing, trying to stay in range, or just sitting on your hands because you're out of range and you don't want to lock in that impermanent loss.
And now, so if we're talking about concentrated positions where you set a range, well, what happens when you have to rebalance? A rebalance is actually just closing that position and opening a new position with a different range. And so when you rebalance, you realize divergence.
You lock in that impermanent loss.
You do. You lock in that impermanent loss when you rebalance. So the same thing is true here for full range liquidity provision. When you provide liquidity full range, meaning without setting a range, you're not concentrating, you're going from 0 to infinity. So when you do full range liquidity provision, when there is price divergence up or down, and then you remove your tokens, your LP tokens from the pool, and you break that LP into the asset A and asset B again, you will receive back a different number of tokens than what you initially started with. And so that is realizing your impermanent loss. Same thing with the concentrated pools. When you provide liquidity and you set a range, and then price moves up or down, and then you rebalance by closing that position and then opening a new position with a different range, you're doing the same thing. You're realizing impermanent loss. It's just that in the concentrated side, you're setting a range first and you're concentrating your liquidity. In the full range side, you're not concentrating your liquidity, but you've still got impermanent loss. They exist in both the full range and the concentrated. Now, the thing about the full range is that it's a little bit easier to hedge impermanent loss. Now, what is a great way to mitigate price divergence? If you provide liquidity in ETH paired with a stable coin, well, you're going to generate a ton of price divergence because the USDC, that stable coin, that thing doesn't move, right? But if you provide liquidity in ETH paired with, maybe Bitcoin, right?
They're very correlated.
Exactly. And so what happens if Bitcoin goes up?
Correlated means they tend to move together.
Exactly right. Exactly. So what happens when Bitcoin goes up? Well, ETH probably goes up too because they're correlated. What happens if Bitcoin goes down? ETH probably goes down too. And so the fact that both assets in the pool kind of sort of move together
Hmm.
that really, really mitigates your price divergence,
Hmm.
which means that you have lower impermanent loss. But here's the kicker though. Do you generate more yield in that ETH BTC pool, or do you generate more yield in that ETH USDC pool?
Usually the ETH USDC pool.
Right. And so it's a trade-off. You earn way more yield in the ETH USDC pool, but you generate much, much more price divergence, which means much greater impermanent loss. Whereas if you're in the ETH BTC pool, hey, there's going to be lower trading volume, most likely. You're going to generate lower yield, but you have much, much less price divergence, which means you've got much, much less impermanent loss. So it's a trade-off.
Well, and one thing to keep in mind is, impermanent loss is measured against hodling. So, as long as your deposit, plus your fees, of course, is constantly growing, then technically, I mean, as long as you're profitable, then it's a good thing. Maybe you didn't make as much as if you hodled, but it's a double-edged sword to where if over time, if you because like right now, like on a couple of my positions I just showed versus hodl, I'm a little bit in the red. Just a day or two ago, I was like $200 like on each of those positions in profit versus hodl. It's and a lot of my positions are super wide. My range positions are super wide ranges. I haven't gone out once in a couple of months, and it's just been stacking fees. But when the market moves in your favor, and say that like one of my positions is wrapped ETH Bitcoin, when those start to move together to the upside, very quickly I go from being a little bit unprofitable to very profitable. So, that's why I tend to do really wide ranges is I just really like to stay in range because it's just, tick, 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 constantly earning me those fees as opposed to trying to get, my whole nut in a couple of days, having a really tight range that just is constantly out of range.
Yeah, it really just comes down to how you measure your profitability because you can be profitable in US dollar terms, but not be profitable in ETH terms. And so all that would mean is you made money in the pool in US dollars, but if you had just held your ETH, you would have made more. And so in ETH terms, you actually lost a little bit. So it just kind of depends on how you measure it and really what your goals are. If your goal is to generate as much yield as possible, well, you probably want to accept the massive impermanent loss and go into an ETH USDC pool. But if your goal instead, like Mike is talking about, is to be in range, not have to rebalance, and be profitable in US dollar terms, well, then maybe you go into an ETH BTC pool with a wide range and you just let it sit and do its thing.
Well,
So,
and you've mentioned before that your impermanent loss, the rate at which it increases towards the bottom of the range,
it
correct?
does. It
Okay.
does.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought I heard you say that.
It does, yeah. So it's a funny thing, and this is much more advanced than
Yeah.
our conversation
Yeah,
here.
I don't want to take you down an advanced rabbit trail, sorry.
No, this is great though. I love this stuff, man. So basically, all you need to know is that when you provide concentrated liquidity, your impermanent loss, which is also referred to as your gamma risk, at the bottom of your range, your impermanent loss becomes much greater. So at the bottom of your range, impermanent loss spikes compared to at the top of your range. Just something to know.
Yeah.
So let's just zoom out and put these two worlds side by side, a DEX versus a centralized exchange or CEX. It really all boils down to control and access, right? With a DEX, you always keep control of your funds. With a CEX, you're trusting them to hold your money. DEXs use these slick AMM formulas for pricing and are open to anyone, while CEXs rely on order books and you've got to sign up and prove who you are. They are just two fundamentally different ways of looking at the world of trading.
So, what do you think about this, Mike? If I'm taking a look and I want to trade, I'm never going to use a centralized exchange unless here's an example. Unless I want to trade something like Canton, that CC token,
Yeah.
I'm really interested in getting my hands on some Canton.
Yeah.
And man, I just can't find it on a decentralized exchange. So that's an example of one of those really limited times where I would for sure consider using a centralized exchange.
Well, and I'll give an example of what David's talking about. So Coinbase, if you swap on Coinbase, like I actually did it yesterday against my better judgment because I wanted to test it out and see if it had gotten any better. And I have Coinbase One, so I don't have trading fees and stuff like that.
Fancy.
Well, it's just because I have the Coinbase card. You have to be a Coinbase one. But yes, I am fancy.
Yep.
So I swapped some Ondo for some Solana, and in doing so, I did $1,000 worth. It basically ended up costing me $20 to do that. Now, if I would have gone over to the Coinbase wallet or over to Aerodrome or a decentralized exchange, it would have costed a fraction of that. I mean, a very small fraction, just for that little bit of extra time. Maybe like 20 cents or 50 cents, if that. So that's what David's talking about is, and that's why we're so bullish on decentralized finance and, staying away from centralized exchanges is for that reason.
Yeah. A centralized exchange is basically just a brokerage. It's basically just, traditional finance, but dressed up in a wig. So you take a look over here at a decent.
So it's a tranny.
Basically, man. But like the decentralized exchange, that's the real deal because there is no centralized entity that's going to tell you if you can trade or swap or not. It's completely permissionless. And that's the beauty. You're trading using code as law. Your counterparty is the smart contract. You don't have to ask any permission to be able to swap or trade. It's permissionless. The pricing is all based on that smart contract, that AMM formula, and you own your assets. You have self-custody. But if you've got like USDC or Bitcoin or ETH or maybe some other asset on a centralized exchange,
you don't own those assets. They do.
Yeah, man, you don't own anything. And so it's the same thing with traditional banks. Like if you log into your, maybe your Chase account or whatever, and you see, okay, I've got $1,000 in my checking account. You don't, all you've got is numbers on a screen.
Yeah.
You don't actually own that. That's a liability for the bank.
Well, people found that out in Greece, a couple of years ago when there was a run on banks and they were, going to the banks to try to, get their, Greek money out to transfer it into US dollars or anything else. And they were like, basically locking the doors and not letting people have their money because they didn't have it available.
Or it could be even worse than that. So, that's an example of the flaws with fractional reserve banking, because if I'm a bank and I'm running a fractional reserve bank and I receive a bunch of deposits from customers, that's a liability on my balance sheet. I've got to lend all that money out. And you might even be able to create more credit based on how much, customer deposits come in the door. Yeah. So a bank might actually end up levering up their deposit base by 50x, which means that for every dollar that came in, they lent out $50. So if there's enough people that go into the bank and say, hey, give me my money, guess what?
The house of cards collapses.
Right. They don't have it.
And that's the great thing about DeFi is that, it's computer code. I mean, it's basically, it won't allow things like that to happen. With smart contracts and, a lot of these things, it's a better way. It's a better system for for especially for us,
Yeah.
because before there's not a whole lot of checks and balances other than trust us, bro. With
Right.
the traditional banking system. And I mean, you're looking at the Federal Reserve and the SEC and these regulatory bodies, and we've seen how inefficient and how much they miss. But computer code that's constantly checking and adjusting and making sure that for every dollar lent that there's more than that in liquidity. So like if you go to the borrow and lending platforms where you're depositing and other people are depositing liquidity and lending it out, the protocol's not going to allow more money to be borrowed than is being lent. It's just, and that's that loan to value we talked about yesterday, where if there's $10 million worth of liquidity, and the loan to value that it will lend out on that asset is only 80%. If there's $100,000, only $80,000 can be lent out of that money. So there's a buffer. That is not how what David was just talking about with fractional reserve banking. That's not what happens in our banks. They have much more money lent out than of liquidity that they actually possess, and that's where you have that pitfall of if all of us went to the bank and said we want our money, they couldn't provide it. So
And it's even worse than that though with traditional banks because the run on the bank, that's just one way that you could lose all your money because they don't have it. Another way that you could lose all your money is, let's say that there's some type of crisis in the region that you live in, or maybe in the state that you live in, or the country that you live in, and the bank that you have a deposit at decides to bail in. So maybe instead of a bailout,
basically use our money to bail themselves out.
Exactly right, man. And so like if you don't read, and even if you do read all the fine print when you open an account at a bank, they can basically just take your deposit.
Yeah.
Like you don't
and those that don't know, in 2008 during the crisis, our legislators, our government are the ones that basically wrote that in to allow them to do that.
Yeah, man. So you could have a run on the bank where, hey, they don't have your money. And, that would be an instance where the bank would fail. You'd lose everything.
They invested in a bunch of commercial real estate and the commercial real estate market collapses and all of those, loans that they have out on all of that stuff basically get called and, they get foreclosed on. They can take all of our money to pay off the debtors, and we don't get anything. It's like when Celsius went under. They have those creditors that get paid first with our money.
Right.
So that's where all that money went, and then whatever's left, that's what they divvied up to everybody.
And how crazy is that, Mike? Like depositors are basically like junior creditors.
Yeah.
You've got the senior and the junior. The senior, those guys get paid out first. The junior, that's you. The person with the deposit at the bank, you get paid out last, if at all.
Yeah.
And it's just like, man, you don't have any of those problems in decentralized finance at all.
No.
But you do have different problems.
You do.
You've got
let's go ahead and get back to that. Sorry. Got on a rabbit trail there.
Yeah, no, this is great though.
And that brings us to the final, really big question. We've seen how this powerful new engine works. It's automated, it's open for everyone, and it's pretty elegant in its mathematical simplicity. But is this the future for all markets? Is the pure logic of an algorithm going to completely replace the, let's say, human-driven chaos of the order book? Well, that is the billion-dollar experiment that's playing out right now in the world of decentralized finance.
And I think that this will replace everything, but this is also a different type of risk, right? So if you're, if you've got an account at like a traditional bank, you've got counterparty risk and you've got risk with the people there and the way that they're running the institution. But if you're on a decentralized exchange and you're operating in decentralized finance, well, the risk there is that there's some type of error in the algorithm or there's some type of bug in the smart contract. And you could also face the same type of ruin where you could lose everything because of a bug in the contract. So different types of risk, but I think that this is better because you actually own your assets.
Mhm.
And in the traditional model, you don't own shit. Like,
Well,
you got an IOU.
like my Aero locks, I have them on Aerodrome, but the actual smart contract or NFT that that is my receipt for those positions and that actual liquidity, I hold those in my wallet. I actually have custody of those in my wallet. Another good example is I won't say it's Moonwell. Like
Yeah,
that platform can go down. I still own those smart contracts, and I can still redeem those other places. Same thing as with Mamo. It's a non-custodial platform. It's one of the on my checklist. Whenever I use a platform, I like to use platforms that are non-custodial.
absolutely. And for me, it comes down to custody. Do you actually own it or not?
Yeah,
Do you actually have custody or not?
yeah,
If you got a bank deposit and you log in and you see, oh, I've got $1,000 in the bank, you don't actually own that. The
no,
bank does. You've got an IOU. You're a creditor. But if you've got one BTC in your wallet, guess what? You own that. You have custody of that.
yeah,
Big difference, man. Big difference. So
yes,
why don't we take a look here at DeFi lending and borrowing? I think this is about 7 minutes long. We should be able to get through some of this in the last couple of minutes here of our call. Let's
yeah,
take a look, man. This will be
Okay, so what if you could get a loan without a credit check, without talking to a single person at a bank, and without filling out any paperwork? It sounds kind of futuristic, right? Well, today we're pulling back the curtain on one of the coolest tools in decentralized finance, DeFi lending. Let's dive in. So let's kick things off with a situation you might find yourself in. Imagine you're holding a crypto asset, maybe some Ethereum, and you think it's going to be worth a lot more down the road. But you also need some cash, like right now. Selling your crypto is an option, of course, but that can mean missing out on those future gains, not to mention getting hit with a capital gains tax bill. So what do you do? And this is exactly where DeFi, or decentralized finance, steps in with a really clever solution. You can actually use your assets to take out a loan, and the whole thing is powered by automated code, smart contracts, running on a blockchain. We're not just talking about a new kind of loan here. We're talking about a whole different way of thinking about finance.
And so think about if you were to go to a bank and apply for a personal loan. Think about all the rigmarole and the headaches you've got to go through just to apply, let alone like actually get approved and get the money. And think about all of the friction, all of the fees, all of that is completely removed by just using a decentralized money market like Aave, for example, or Morpho or Euler. Those are three examples of really, really top tier decentralized money markets where the only thing that matters is, do you have the collateral?
yeah.
Yes or no? That's it.
That's it.
And that really gets to the core difference. Traditional banks, they look at your past. They look at your credit score, your job, your income. Basically, they're judging your trustworthiness. But in DeFi, nobody knows who you are. And frankly, nobody cares.
Right.
The only thing that matters is the collateral you bring to the table.
Right.
The whole system is completely permissionless.
And look at that messed up logo for Bitcoin. It's like they tried to put a Bitcoin B in. Yeah.
Now, this brings us to the absolute bedrock principle of DeFi lending, over-collateralization. It's a simple but super powerful idea. To get a loan, you have to deposit collateral that's worth more than the loan you want to take out. For example, to borrow $100 of a stablecoin like USDC, which is just a crypto token pegged 1-to-1 with the US dollar, you might need to lock up, say, $150 worth of your Ethereum. That extra $50, that's the safety cushion that secures the entire system.
So, Mike, that's what you were talking about with the LTVs earlier.
Yep.
So, how does this actually work in practice? Well, it's surprisingly simple. First, you connect your crypto wallet to a lending protocol. You can think of it like an automated bank run by code, and you deposit your collateral. Easy. Second, you just choose what you want to borrow and how much. And third, and this is the part you absolutely cannot forget, you have to constantly, and I mean constantly, monitor the health of your loan. Let's talk more about that monitoring part. Because in DeFi lending, pretty much everything comes down to one single super critical number. It's called your health factor. This little number is how the protocol constantly checks how risky your loan is, and it's the one thing you need to keep your eyes glued to.
Okay, so there's a lot to know about health factors and how they're calculated. I think the most important thing here, though, is just to understand that if you put up, let's say, Bitcoin as collateral, and then you borrow a stable coin, you borrow cash against that Bitcoin, maybe you borrow USDC. In my opinion, USDC is cash. So if you put up your Bitcoin and you borrow cash against it, that is leverage.
Mhm.
You are now levered long Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so what happens if Bitcoin declines and all of a sudden your health factor
Starts
moves?
to drop
Yeah, your health factor is going to drop. And
because the value of your collateral is decreasing. So you borrowed USDC, so it's not moving.
right,
So the difference is, what's causing that health factor to go down. And that's what they're talking about. Why you need to make sure that you're, at least once a day going in there and monitoring what is my health factor. If you see that Bitcoin's dropping in this case, you might want to go in there and you might want to pay down that loan a little bit, to make sure that you don't get liquidated.
exactly right. And so if you put up $1,000 of Bitcoin, and then let's say you were able to borrow maybe $700 against that $1,000. Well, now your buffer is the difference between what you borrowed and the value of your collateral. So if you put up $1,000 of Bitcoin and you borrowed $700 against it, that buffer is only $300. So what happens if Bitcoin is down by 30%? Well,
You're going to get liquidated.
you would be liquidated. You would lose your Bitcoin. So
And that's to protect the people that provided the liquidity, the people that are lending. It's to
right,
ensure that they don't lose money from borrowing you money. So it's the same thing that a bank does currently. If you get a loan for a house or a car, if for whatever reason, if the real estate market crashes, and this is something that has happened before, um, if the value, house prices, plummet, if the value of the house gets to a certain point, the bank can actually come and foreclose on you, even if you're making your payments on time, because the collateral is less than the amount loaned. So just something to understand. This isn't just a DeFi thing. This is a traditional finance thing as well.
it really is, man. And this stuff is critical to understand because these protocols, they are permissionless, so anyone can use them. But just because you can use a protocol doesn't mean you understand it. So what happens if you provide your Bitcoin, you supply your Bitcoin as collateral, you borrow against it, but you really didn't understand what you were getting yourself into, and Bitcoin moves, it moves down maybe, and all of a sudden you go and you check on Aave and you don't have any more Bitcoin, man. Like, you really need to understand this stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Mike, over the weekend, I am going to finish up with DeFi High School. So
Nice.
I'm going to rename this. So this is not going to be the beginner track. This is going to be DeFi High School. And
Nice.
this intermediate track, this is going to be DeFi University. And then
Nice.
I think after I'm done with the DeFi High School stuff, I'll probably think about like what it would look like to build, like a
A
DeFi
DeFi
master.
doctorate.
Yeah, DeFi doctorate, man, like a a PhD program or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so this is going to be great, dude.
DeFi PhD.
DeFi PhD, man. So this is a series of 5 DeFi high school courses.
Mhm.
We've got money basics, crypto fundamentals, your first crypto steps, staying safe in crypto, and then of course an introduction to DeFi. So this is going to be really great, man. And starting on Monday next week, we're going to be going through all the DeFi high school stuff, man. It's going to be really, really cool, and I'm sure that everyone's going to get a ton of value from this. So I'm looking forward to it, man.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
So,
and I definitely want to it's like go through it when you're done, just to so that I just understand it, like in a detailed way. So like while we're talking about it and things like that, because yeah, it's kind of important that like metrics finance. I'm still working on understanding all that, and of course Jake's always doing updates and upgrades and adding functionality, and so just staying up to speed on all of that, and kind of making sure that it all works as it's supposed to. That's kind of what I'm trying to do currently, as well as stay on top of protocols like Aerodrome and the new platform that's coming out here in a couple of months, and just everything moves so fast. Staying up to speed with a lot of this stuff is quite the challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah, but you know what? It's a lot of fun. There's always something new to learn every single day, and there's
Yeah.
always a new opportunity. And speaking of new opportunities, I got to connect this Seeker phone, man, to Wi-Fi so I can see if there was actually an airdrop or not. Because I don't know. I saw on that, like on X, that the SKR token, that they started airdropping those, and
Yeah.
that some guys were getting like big
Sizable.
airdrops. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we'll see, man. We'll see. I'll find out. You'll know
Absolutely.
later on today.
All right. Well, let me know. I'd be interested to hear.
I
Well,
will.
great episode, brother, and we'll see everybody on Monday. And tonight we have our Crypto and Chill show. It will be 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, and then starting Monday, we'll back to this at 9 a.m. Pacific and noon Eastern. So
Awesome, man.
we'll see y'all. Have a great weekend. Until next time, Veteran Crypto out.
Peace.